Everyone feared the alien vampire woman. I approached her anyway on the bustling galactic hub of Tryon Station. Rumors of an alien woman filled the air. They spoke of her with terror, caution, and a mixture of awe. She was known as the alien vampire woman, a name whispered in dark corners of the station, wherever the bravest dared to share their stories. People claimed she came from a distant star system, a place so far removed from the familiar that no one truly understood what she was. All they knew was her power, her cold, calculating nature, and the fear she instilled wherever she went. Lysara, the woman at the heart of these whispers, had lived on Tryon Station for what seemed like an eternity. Her presence was both elusive and unforgettable. With pale, almost translucent skin that shimmered under the dim lights of the station, she walked with an eerie grace. Her fangs, razor-sharp and gleaming, gave her the appearance of a predator, something dangerous, untouchable, a force to be reckoned with. Her eyes, glowing with an unsettling light, were the last thing most people saw before their lives were drained away. The stories about her were countless. Some said she could drain the very life force from a person with nothing more than a glance. Others claimed she could manipulate shadows and darkness, using them to her advantage like a weapon. The station's inhabitants were full of caution, always crossing the street when they saw her, avoiding her path as if their very survival depended on it. No one knew her true story, only the rumors and the fear. And yet Cale wasn't afraid, at least not in the way the others were. He had heard the stories, the hushed conversations in the cantina, the exaggerated tales told with wide eyes. He knew better than to believe them all. Yes, Lysara was different, that much was undeniable. But was she the monster everyone feared, or was there more to her than what the station's inhabitants chose to believe? Cale was no stranger to danger. He had been traveling across the stars for years, from one station to the next, from one planet to another. He had seen things that would make others turn pale, faced adversities that would break weaker men. But fear wasn't in his blood. Curiosity, on the other hand, burned bright in his heart. It was that curiosity that led him to Lysara, the enigmatic alien vampire woman. He had watched her from afar many times before, always at a distance, always cautious. There were few who dared to approach her, and even fewer who had ever returned with their lives intact. He had seen the way she walked through the station's corridors, the way the crowd seemed to part for her, as if they all instinctively knew that she was a force that shouldn't be tested. Yet Cale couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than the fear she invoked. One evening, he decided to act on his curiosity. He made his way to the darker, quieter sections of the station, places where the lights were dim and the air felt heavy with secrets. These were the areas where Lysara was most often seen, alone, walking in solitude. It was said that she preferred the shadows, that she shunned the company of others, perhaps because there was no one who could understand her. Cale knew that if he was going to find her, it would be in these shadowy corners, away from the busy crowds and the watchful eyes of the fearful. As he turned the corner of a dimly lit corridor, Cale saw her standing there, her figure as imposing as the stories had described. She was tall but not overly so, her posture graceful, almost regal. Her pale skin glowed softly in the low light, and her eyes, those piercing, luminous eyes, were fixed directly on him. For a moment, neither of them moved. It was as if time itself had paused. Cale didn't back down. He had expected fear to grip him, but it didn't. Instead, there was a strange calmness in his chest. He took a step forward, then another, each movement deliberate, as if the weight of his decision was pressing down on him. The air between them felt thick with tension, yet Cale couldn't look away from her. Finally, Lysara spoke, her voice as cold and smooth as velvet. "I knew you would come," she said, her gaze unwavering. "All the others cower, and yet you walk toward me unafraid." Cale didn't flinch. "I'm not afraid," he replied, his voice steady. "But I'm not here to beg for my life either. I want to know who you really are. Why does the whole station fear you? Why have they turned you into a legend of terror?" Her lips curled into a small, amused smile, but it wasn't a smile of kindness. It was a smile born of something older, something far more dangerous. "You think you can understand me? You, a human, think you can see past the stories and the rumors?" "I don't need to understand everything," Cale said, his gaze unwavering. "I just need to know the truth, and if the truth means facing you, then that's what I'll do." Lysara tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. She studied him for a long moment as though deciding whether to dismiss him or entertain him. Finally, she spoke again. "Very well," she said, her voice softer now. "I'll give you a chance to prove your worth. Survive 3 tests. Only then will I tell you the truth." Kale's heart quickened, but he didn't hesitate. "What kind of tests?" he asked, his mind already racing with the possibilities. "You'll see," Lysara replied, her tone laced with a quiet promise of danger. "But be warned, human, I have no mercy. Fail and you won't leave this place alive." Kale didn't flinch at her words. His curiosity, his resolve were stronger than any fear that could have taken root in his heart. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. "I'll survive," he said, more to himself than to her, "and I'll learn the truth, all of it." Lysara's smile widened, but this time there was something almost approving in her gaze. "We'll see," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of darkness. "We'll see." And with that, the first of Kale's trials began. Kale felt the weight of the silence as Lysara's gaze lingered on him. The eerie glow of her eyes cut through the darkness like twin beacons, and he could feel the power radiating off her. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to turn and run, but he held his ground. This wasn't just another encounter. This was a chance to learn the truth. The first test began before he even had a chance to brace himself. Without a warning, the air around them shifted, becoming thick and suffocating. The dim lights flickered, then went out completely, plunging them into absolute darkness. The station, which had been alive with the hum of engines and the quiet chatter of travelers, was now silent, as though the whole world had frozen. Kale's heart pounded in his chest, the silence ringing in his ears. He stood still, trying to make sense of his surroundings, but there was nothing to guide him. He could barely see his own hands in front of his face. A chill swept over him, and his senses screamed that he wasn't alone. Lysara's presence was everywhere, her cold energy like a fog he couldn't escape. "Where are you?" Kale called out, his voice steady but unsure. His eyes darted around in the darkness, searching for a sign of her, but all he could feel was the weight of her gaze. "Your first trial is simple," Lysara's voice echoed from the shadows. "Survive your own fears." Before Kale could react, the darkness around him started to shift. It wasn't just the absence of light that unnerved him, it was something more. Shapes began to form in the blackness, blurry and indistinct at first, but growing sharper with each passing second. They were figures moving towards him, their forms familiar yet distorted, twisted in ways that shouldn't be possible. His childhood home, a place of safety and comfort, appeared before him, but it was no longer the warm, welcoming house he remembered. The walls were cracked, the furniture overturned, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. The door to his old bedroom swung open, revealing the empty room. Kale swallowed hard. This wasn't just a hallucination. This was real. His mind had conjured up this nightmare, and Lysara was manipulating it. He knew it. He had to fight it. But the fear was already creeping in, gripping him by the throat. He had buried the memories of his parents' tragic death deep in his heart. The accident that had taken everything from him, that had left him with nothing but the remnants of a life he could never have again. The guilt, the sorrow, he had locked those feelings away, buried them beneath the surface so he wouldn't have to face them. But now, in the midst of this darkness, they were all coming back. The memories were vivid, sharp, each one cutting deeper than the last. Kale could hear the screams, the crashing sound of metal on metal, the feeling of helplessness as he watched everything he loved disappear. He staggered back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "No, this isn't real," he whispered to himself, though he knew it wasn't true. His mind was playing tricks on him, but the fear felt all too real. It felt like he was living through it again. "Face it," Lysara's voice whispered, softer now as if she were taunting him. "You can't outrun your past, Kale. It's always there, waiting for you. You can't escape it." He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. No, he wasn't going to let her win. He wasn't going to let his fear control him. He had faced worse before. He had survived. This was no different. He could beat it. Kale's mind raced. He needed to ground himself. The nightmare, the dark figures, none of it was real. It was just a trick. Lysara was trying to break him. He couldn't let her. With a deep breath, Kale closed his eyes, forcing himself to push the fear aside. He focused on the present, on the here and now. He remembered the feeling of solid ground beneath his feet, the sound of his steady breathing. Slowly, the figures in the darkness began to fade, their presence weakening as Kale fought to regain control. The house was still there, but it wasn't real. The voices, the memories, they were his own, but they didn't have to define him. Kale forced the images from his mind, replacing them with something else. He thought of the stars he had traveled, the places he had been, the adventure, the people he had met. One by one, the figures disappeared until all that was left was the silence. The darkness lifted, and the dim lights of the station flickered back to life. Kale stood there, breathing heavily but victorious. For a moment there was no sound. Then Lysara's voice came, softer than before but still filled with that eerie, haunting quality. "Impressive, but it is only the first test, Kale. Do not let your guard down." Kale didn't respond. He knew better than to let his guard down. He had made it through the first trial, but he could feel the weight of the next one approaching. Lysara wasn't done with him yet. The second test came soon after. Kale didn't have time to process his victory before the environment around him shifted again. This time the air was thick with tension and the temperature dropped. A chill ran down his spine as he realized what was happening. He was no longer alone. Lysara was testing him again, but this time it would be different. He found himself in a large, open space, a cold, metallic room with shadows moving in the corners. The lights were harsh, creating deep, unnatural contrasts that stretched across the room. Before him stood Lysara, but this time her eyes glowed with a predatory intensity and her lips curled into a cruel smile. "I will test your resolve now," she said. "Fight me." Kale's stomach tightened. He had known this moment was coming, but he hadn't been prepared for the overwhelming presence of Lysara. The air seemed to hum with energy as she stepped forward, her form shifting in and out of shadow. The air around her crackled with power. "You can try to outsmart me again, human," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "But you won't escape me this time." Kale gritted his teeth and reached for his weapon, a small plasma blade that had served him well on his travels. He had faced creatures and enemies far more dangerous than Lysara, but there was something about her that made his skin crawl. This was no ordinary fight. This was a battle of wills, not just strength. Lysara lunged at him, faster than he could react. Her movements were fluid, her body a blur of shadow and light. Kale barely managed to dodge her first strike, feeling the sharp edge of her claw graze his arm. Blood spilled from the wound, but Kale didn't slow down. He had faced enemies before, but none like this. Lysara's speed, her strength, were far beyond anything he had encountered. She was relentless, striking from all angles, her movements as precise as a predator's. Each blow was calculated, each movement designed to bring him to his knees, but Kale was no stranger to combat. He knew how to fight, how to adapt. He used his agility to stay one step ahead, parrying her strikes with his blade, narrowly avoiding each deadly lunge. Every time she struck, Kale countered, each movement becoming more fluid as he adjusted to her rhythm. He knew he couldn't beat her with strength alone. He had to outthink her, use her speed against her. For what felt like an eternity, they danced around each other, a flurry of motion, light, and shadow. Kale's muscles burned, his breath coming in short gasps, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. This was his challenge. And in the end, after what seemed like hours, Kale finally saw his opening. With a swift movement, he managed to disarm her, sending her blade skittering across the floor. Lysara stood there, her eyes wide with surprise, a flicker of respect passing through them. "You're not like the others," she said, breathing heavily. "But this isn't over." Kale nodded, wiping the sweat from his brow. "I know, but I'll survive." And with that, the second trial ended, and the true test of his resolve began. The second trial had tested Kale's physical limits. His body ached from the constant movement, the rush of adrenaline, and the battle against Lysara's overwhelming speed and power. But he had survived, just as he had promised himself. Lysara's gaze, though full of intensity, had held a flicker of approval in it when she saw how he fought, how he refused to give up. Now, as he caught his breath, Kale wondered what the next trial would be. He had faced the darkness of his past, fought for survival, and now he had to wonder if Lysara would push him further, into realms he was not prepared for. The tension in the air was thick, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something far more personal was about to unfold. Lysara, her expression unreadable, didn't speak for a long while. Her presence alone filled the room, making the space feel smaller than it was. Kale stood tall, watching her, waiting. He had passed the first two tests, but she was right. It wasn't over yet. He could feel the weight of the final trial coming. She finally spoke, her voice quieter than before, yet still commanding. "The last trial is not one of strength. It is not a battle of will or body. It is a battle of the mind." Kale furrowed his brow. He had faced both physical and emotional tests so far. Was this one going to be different? He nodded, trying to prepare himself mentally. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with curiosity. Lysara's lips curled into a faint smile, but it was devoid of any warmth. "You've already proven that you can survive the physical challenges, but now you will confront something much deeper. You will face the darkness within your own mind." Before Kale could respond, the room around them began to shift once again. The cold metallic walls blurred, replaced by something else. The air around him thickened, and the temperature dropped. He shivered, but this time it wasn't the chill of the room. It was the sense of unease creeping through his veins. A new environment materialized before him. It was a room, but not just any room. It was his mind, distorted and twisted, but it was undeniably his. The space was large, filled with mirrors that stretched up to the high ceiling, reflecting an endless repetition of Kale's own face. But these weren't the reflections he recognized. They were the versions of himself that he had locked away, the versions he didn't want to face. He stood in the center of the room, feeling the oppressive weight of the mirrors around him. His every movement was reflected, but the reflections were wrong. They didn't move the way he did. They didn't act the way he acted. Some of them had expressions of despair, while others looked angry, vengeful. One of the reflections smiled wickedly, a cold grin that sent a wave of nausea through him. "Kale!" a voice from one of the reflections called, the voice distorted but unmistakably his own. "Are you proud of who you are?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. It was a question he had avoided for years, and now, standing in the middle of his own mind, it felt impossible to escape. Kale's eyes darted from one reflection to the next, unable to shake the feeling that they were all parts of him, parts he didn't want to acknowledge. "No," Kale whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm not proud, not of who I've become." The reflection that had spoken to him tilted its head, the cruel smile growing wider. "Why not? You've seen so much, haven't you? You've done things others would never dream of, things that have pushed you forward, but deep down you know the truth." "You don't like what you see in the mirror, do you?" Kale's breath hitched. The reflection wasn't just asking about his past, it was digging deeper, forcing him to confront the very core of who he was. He had always been the one who kept moving forward, never looking back. The memories of his childhood, of his parents' death, of his past mistakes, they were buried deep inside him, never to be uncovered. But here, in this twisted space, they were coming back, demanding to be seen. "You've never stopped to face your demons," the reflection continued. "And now they've come to collect." Kale clenched his fists, trying to resist the weight of the reflection's words, but it was hard. The doubt, the regret, it was all so strong. "I don't have time for regrets," Kale muttered, his voice shaking slightly. "Oh, but you do," the reflection replied. "You can't outrun your past. No matter how far you go, it will always be there, waiting for you." The mirrors around him began to ripple, distorting his face into grotesque versions of itself. Each reflection spoke to him, each one showing a different side of his mind, a different version of himself that he had long since buried. Some looked happy, others angry, but all of them had one thing in common: they all judged him. For the first time in his life, Kale felt himself faltering. The doubts, the questions he had pushed aside, began to bubble to the surface. He had always run from them, burying them under the guise of moving forward. But now, in this twisted reflection of his own mind, they couldn't be ignored. Kale's knees buckled as he fell to the ground, unable to look at the reflections anymore. The weight of his own self-loathing, his regret, was unbearable. The truth was that he wasn't proud of the man he had become. He had run from his past for so long that he had become someone he barely recognized. "I don't know who I am anymore," Kale whispered, his voice barely audible above the whispering voices of his reflections. There was a moment of silence. Then Lysara's voice broke through the haze, cutting through the noise of his own thoughts. "The only way out of this trial is to accept it, Kale. You cannot outrun your past, but you can face it. You can own it." Kale took a deep breath, his chest tight with emotion. The reflections continued to whisper, each one taunting him, each one reminding him of his failures. But Lysara's words echoed in his mind. "Face it, own it." Slowly, Kale stood up, his legs shaking beneath him. He looked into the nearest mirror, meeting his own gaze. For the first time, he truly looked at himself, at the man he had become. And for the first time, he accepted it. He wasn't perfect. He had made mistakes. He had run from the past, but it didn't define him. "I'm not perfect," Kale said aloud, his voice steady now. But I'm still here, and I'm not giving up. The reflections around him began to fade, their harsh whispers dying away. The twisted version of his mind unraveled, leaving behind the silence of acceptance. Cale took another deep breath, his heart still racing, but now a sense of peace washed over him. He had faced the darkness within himself, and he had come out the other side stronger for it. Lysara appeared before him, her expression unreadable, but her eyes softened slightly. You've passed the third trial, Cale. You've proven that you can face what lies within. Cale nodded, his chest still tight but relieved. I didn't expect it to be this difficult. That is the nature of the trials, Lysara said, her voice calm. To challenge you not just in strength but in heart and mind, but you have passed. The final test awaits. Cale felt a surge of determination, his earlier doubts now fading into the background. He had faced his past, survived the trials, and now he was ready for whatever came next. Cale stood in the quiet aftermath of the third trial. The reflections, the whispers, the haunting voices, they had faded, leaving only a lingering calm in their wake. He felt different now. Lighter, perhaps, stronger, certainly. But even with that sense of accomplishment, he knew that his journey wasn't over. The final trial loomed ahead, and he could feel its presence pressing down on him, just out of reach but unmistakably near. Lysara watched him closely, her gaze unreadable as always. Her presence seemed to fill the room, her energy radiating from her like an invisible force. She didn't speak at first, merely observing him as he stood silently, his breath steady and calm. He had passed the physical tests. He had faced his darkest fears and survived. But what else would this final trial demand of him? Finally she spoke, her voice low and soft, yet still carrying that underlying authority. You have done well so far, Cale, but there is one last thing you must face. This trial will not test your body nor your mind. It will test your soul. Cale looked at her, confusion clouding his thoughts for a moment. My soul, he repeated, uncertain. What does that even mean? Lysara's eyes softened, but only slightly. You've faced your fears, your past, your strength. Now you must face something far more personal. The truth of who you are and what you are willing to sacrifice to reach your ultimate goal. Before Cale could respond, the environment around him shifted again. The air became thick, as though it were charged with a strange energy. The room seemed to stretch, growing larger, yet at the same time it felt confining. Cale's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't see it at first, but then, out of the shadows, something began to materialize. It was a figure, a silhouette, standing just ahead of him, bathed in light. The figure was familiar, though Cale couldn't place it at first. As the light around it shifted, the form became clearer. It was a woman, though her features were shrouded in mystery, her face obscured by a soft glow. She was dressed in simple but elegant clothes, her hands clasped in front of her as if waiting for Cale to recognize her. Who are you? Cale asked, his voice steady but a thread of unease running through it. The woman didn't respond, but she didn't need to. Cale recognized her instantly. It was a memory, a person from his past, his mother. His heart skipped a beat. He had long buried the memories of her, of their life together before the accident. She had died when he was too young to understand, too young to realize what it would mean to lose her. Her face, so vivid in his memory, was now standing before him as if she had never left. Why are you here? Cale asked, stepping back, his mind reeling. You're not real. The woman smiled gently, the sadness in her eyes unmistakable. I am as real as the choices you've made, Cale, as real as the path you have walked. Cale's mind raced. The memories of his childhood flooded back, his mother's comforting voice, the way she had always made him feel safe, protected. The accident had taken her away from him, and with her, the world he had known had shattered. He had been forced to grow up too quickly, forced to rely on himself when he had no idea how. The pain of that loss had never truly gone away. It had always lingered just beneath the surface, waiting for a chance to break free. And now, standing before him, was the source of all that pain, the reminder of what he had lost. Why now? Cale asked, his voice shaky. Why are you here? I've moved on, I've survived, I've faced my fears. The woman's eyes softened with understanding. You think you've moved on, Cale, but there are parts of you that you have yet to face. There are pieces of your heart you've locked away, hidden from yourself, and those pieces are holding you back. Cale shook his head, stepping back again. I've done everything you've asked. I've faced my fears, my past. I've fought and I've survived. What more do you want from me? Her smile faded slightly, her gaze turning sorrowful. It's not about what I want from you, Cale. It's about what you want from yourself. Do you truly understand the cost of what you seek? You've already lost so much, and there is more you must sacrifice if you are to continue on this path. The words cut through him like a knife. He had always been willing to sacrifice, always willing to keep pushing forward. But he had never stopped to think about the price of his ambition, the cost of his relentless drive to survive. What had he given up along the way? What had he lost in the pursuit of his goals? Lysara's words echoed in his mind. You must face the truth of who you are and what you are willing to sacrifice. But what did that really mean? What was the truth that Lysara wanted him to see? What had he become in the process of surviving? Kale looked at the woman, his mother, the person who had shaped him into the man he was today. I don't understand, he whispered. What do I need to do? She stepped forward, her hand reaching out, but Kale instinctively stepped back, unsure of what to do. Kale, she said, her voice filled with a quiet sadness. You must let go of your past, not just the pain, but the guilt, the anger, the fear. You have carried it with you for so long, and it has shaped you into someone you don't fully recognize. To truly move forward, you must forgive yourself. Only then will you be free. The words hit him like a wave. Forgiveness. He had never truly forgiven himself for what had happened. The accident, the loss, the way he had failed to protect her. He had buried those feelings deep within him, convinced that if he pushed forward hard enough, he could outrun them. But now, here they were, standing in front of him, demanding to be addressed. His heart tightened in his chest. Forgiveness was the last thing he thought he deserved. But the woman's words, her presence, reminded him of something he had long forgotten. That forgiveness wasn't just about excusing past mistakes. It was about letting go of the weight that had held him down for so long. I don't know how, Kale whispered. I've never known how to forgive myself. She smiled gently, her face filled with love and understanding. The first step is accepting that you were never meant to carry this burden alone. You have the power to let go, Kale, you always have. As she spoke, the space around them began to change again. The mirrors that had once surrounded him shattered, their pieces dissolving into the air like dust. The woman, his mother, faded away too, her image becoming part of the light, her presence no longer so sharp and real. Kale was left standing in the now empty room, the weight of her words hanging in the air around him. He stood there for a long time, alone with his thoughts, processing everything that had just happened. He realized now that the greatest obstacle in his journey hadn't been the trials or the tests. It had been the refusal to face the parts of himself that he had kept hidden away for so long. Kale closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. For the first time in years, he felt a shift inside him. A release. The chains that had held him captive, his past, his regrets, his guilt, had loosened. He wasn't sure if they were gone entirely, but they no longer held the same weight. When he opened his eyes, Lysara was standing before him again. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her gaze that told him she had been watching him closely, waiting for this moment. "You faced the final trial," she said, her voice calm but filled with a quiet respect. "You've truly accepted who you are, and you've let go of the past that has held you back. You have proven yourself, Kale." Kale nodded slowly, his mind clearer than it had been in a long time. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he felt ready for it. Ready to move forward, ready to face whatever came next. "Thank you," he said quietly, though he wasn't sure if she would understand. But it didn't matter, he understood now. That was enough. And with that, Lysara's trial came to an end. Kale stood in the silence that followed the final trial. The heavy weight of the last test had lifted from his chest, but he still felt the pulse of his heartbeat echoing through his body. It had been a journey of discovery, of confronting fears and weaknesses, and of coming to terms with the pieces of himself he had long ignored. Now in the stillness of the room, he knew he had changed. Lysara stood across from him, her expression unreadable as always, her eyes calculating and sharp. The energy between them felt different now. The tension that had once filled every moment of their encounters had diminished. There was a subtle shift, an understanding that had emerged between them, though neither of them had spoken of it. Kale didn't know if Lysara would offer him the answers he sought, but he knew that he had made it this far. He had survived her trials, faced his own darkness, and learned to forgive himself. That was enough. For a long moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the station's machinery in the distance. Kale's thoughts drifted back to the beginning of his journey, to the man he had been when he first walked into this place. A man driven by curiosity, arrogance, and the belief that he could survive anything. But now, after all that had happened, he realized that survival wasn't about strength or speed. It was about understanding oneself, facing the truth, and letting go of the weight of the past. Finally, Lysara spoke, breaking the silence with a voice that was as cold and calm as ever. "You have passed all the trials, Kale, but there is one final question." Her eyes locked onto his. "What will you do now?" Kale met her gaze, his heart steady. The question was simple, but its meaning was profound. What did it all mean? What was the purpose of surviving the trials if he didn't know where to go from here? "I'll continue," Kale said, his voice clear and unwavering. "I'll keep moving forward. I've learned that the journey doesn't end. I thought it was about finding answers, but now I see that it's about the choices we make along the way." Lysara's eyes narrowed slightly, as though she were studying him, trying to determine the truth in his words. "You've learned something important, then," she said, her tone softening just a fraction. "It's not about the destination, Kale. It's about the person you become as you walk the path." Kale nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. The trials had shaped him, but they had also revealed something deeper, something he hadn't understood at the start. The path wasn't just about surviving the challenges. It was about how he chose to face them, how he chose to grow through them. "You could go back to your life, Kale," Lysara continued, her voice quiet but filled with an ancient weight. "You could walk away from all of this and no one would stop you. The trials are over. But the truth is, you will always carry the lessons with you. You can never forget what you have learned here." Kale felt a flicker of uncertainty deep within him. Could he walk away? Could he just leave this place behind, move on, and forget about everything he had faced? It seemed impossible. The trials, the self-discovery, everything had changed him in ways he couldn't even describe. And now, as he stood at the edge of something new, he realized that he didn't want to forget. He didn't want to erase the lessons he had learned, the strength he had discovered within himself. "I don't want to forget," Kale said, his voice firm. "I don't want to walk away from this. I've seen the truth, and now I need to find a way to use it." Lysara's gaze softened just a little. "Then you understand," she said. "The world is vast, Kale. There are always more trials, more challenges ahead, but you have something that others don't. You've faced yourself and you've accepted who you are. That is the key to everything." Kale took a deep breath, absorbing the weight of her words. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with unknowns. But for the first time, he felt ready. He wasn't the same person who had walked into this place, afraid of facing his own fears. He was stronger not because of the trials themselves, but because he had confronted the parts of himself that he had buried for so long. "I'll use what I've learned," Kale said, looking Lysara directly in the eye. "I'll take these lessons and keep moving forward. I'll find my purpose, and I'll face whatever comes next. I know now that it's not about the trials themselves, but about the person I become by facing them." Lysara nodded slowly, her eyes filled with a mixture of respect and something else, perhaps understanding. "Then go, Kale," she said quietly. "Your journey is far from over, but you are ready." With those words, the air around them shifted again. The room began to dissolve, the darkness of the trials receding, and the familiar sights of Tryon Station returned. The hum of the station's engines, the sounds of distant chatter, the bright lights and bustling crowds. It was all there just as it had been before Kale entered this strange and dangerous journey. But everything felt different now. He felt different. As the last remnants of the trial faded, Kale took a deep breath, grounding himself in the present moment. The trials had tested him in ways he never could have imagined, and though he had been pushed to his limits, he had emerged stronger, more determined than ever. He had faced his fears, his doubts, and the ghosts of his past, and now he was ready to face whatever came next. But for the first time, Kale understood that it wasn't about defeating the trials or conquering his enemies. It was about how he responded to the challenges life threw at him. It was about the choices he made, the growth he allowed himself to experience. Lysara had given him more than just the opportunity to survive her trials. She had given him the freedom to choose his own path, to define his own future. As he stepped forward into the bustling corridors of the station, Kale felt a sense of peace wash over him. The world felt larger now, full of possibilities. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He was ready for it. He had faced the trials, faced himself, and emerged from it all stronger. And no matter what lay ahead, Kale was determined to keep moving forward, to keep growing, and to keep learning. For the first time in a long time, Kale felt like he had a purpose. a purpose he had discovered for himself, not given to him by anyone else. He didn't know what the future held, but he was no longer afraid of the unknown. As Kale walked through the corridors of Tryon Station, a new sense of purpose filled his heart. He had come a long way, and though the journey was far from over, he knew he was ready for whatever came next. And with that thought in mind, he stepped into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges awaited him, knowing that whatever happened, he was no longer the same man who had first walked into the darkness.